All right, so I think we're live now. My name is Jake Tonkel. I'm running for San Jose City Council for District 6 in 2020, and I'm here with Monica Mallon, who's a local transportation advocate, and we want to discuss what does transportation look like for the next 10 years here in San Jose, here in Silicon Valley, and how has COVID impacted that change? Welcome, Monica.
Hi, everyone.
So, Monica, would you mind explaining a little bit of your background and what got you involved in transportation advocacy?
So I've been a lifelong transit rider. I've been taking VTA, Caltrain, BART, Muni, and all of the other transit systems in the Bay Area since I was very young. And, you know, I haven't owned a car my entire life, so I've really been using sustainable transportation to get around. And when I was about 19, I realized that we're having all these service cuts and things weren't moving in the direction that I wanted them to be moving in. And then I thought that we should have them moving in. So started going to VTA meetings and Caltrain meetings and more recently MTC meetings. And I started standing up for myself and my community and for better transit for everyone.
We appreciate your work. Would you mind explaining for people the difference between VTA, MTC, the different agencies and how they overlap, just so we can get an idea of where the impact needs to be in a regional effort?
Yeah, so MTC is supposed to oversee all of the agencies and help with planning and coordination. Whether they do that well or not is somewhat debatable, but they help allocate state funding and funding from toll revenues and supposedly help with planning. And then VTA is an independent special district, which means that it's not really part of the state and it's not really part of the county, but they're responsible for the local bus and light rail service in Santa Clara County. And their board is made up of elected officials from the Board of Supervisors and city councils within the cities in Santa Clara County. And then Caltrain is a whole different thing. It's a joint powers agreement between Santa Clara County, San Mateo County, and San Francisco County, and they control Caltrain, which is a commuter rail line right now that goes from Gilroy to San Francisco, and hopefully one day it will be fully electrified and more than just a commuter service.
It wasn't that long ago that we got electrification funds from DC, right?
Yeah, it's been pretty recent, but even with the pandemic, they've still been able to make progress on that, which is great.
Do they have an expected time for when it should be fully electric, or is it more
sometime within the next few years, hopefully?
That seems to be the way public transportation goes in Silicon Valley, is in the next few years, and then they extend the deadline a little bit. And, do you have any insight into why that always keeps happening?
Well, I think the root cause of everything is that we really live in a world of scarcity when it comes to transit funds, because we are not really getting a lot of help from the federal government anymore. So we rely primarily on county sales tax to fund transportation. And then some agencies like Caltrain are very reliant on fares. So when we're in a situation like this, where there's an economic downturn and less people are commuting, that dramatically impacts the revenue and the service and what they're able to do and what service they're able to provide.
Yeah, and you mentioned Caltrain relies a lot on fares, but VTA doesn't, right? What other mechanisms do they get funding from besides sales tax?
VTA, the second biggest thing that they get funding from is actually a state sales tax, which is distributed by MTC. And then fares are normally about 7%.
Okay, so it's not a heavy amount for fares, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Well, so we've got these transportation agencies and they overlap in some ways and they have to connect in others. And that's what Deardon Station is looking at becoming as well. Have you been following the transit plan for that and as they move forward?
Yeah, I think the transit plan for that has really come a long way. And I think that they will end up getting to a plan that is good, especially in terms of the transit, maybe not the actual Google development itself, but that's a whole another issue. But yeah, I think in terms of the transit plan, they're really focusing a lot on being able to make connections between the different types of transits. The only question really now is how to pay for the station and whether or not HighSpeed Rail is actually going to end up getting there.
Right. Another important topic for District 6, we do have certain neighborhoods that are going to be impacted by whichever design high-speed rail goes with, and if and when it ever makes it to the city of San Jose. So there's a lot going on. We have BART coming through San Jose now, high-speed rail. There's improvements to Caltrain to be able to make it faster and have more trains as well as they electrify it. So there's some improvements there, but locally, what it takes to get people to commute within the city of San Jose, what kind of options and what are people looking at right now from getting from one side of town to the other?
So right now, VTA buses and light rail are the main thing that's providing service throughout San Jose and the county, but the system is very underfunded, and service has gone in the opposite direction right now. We have less service than we did when I was born, and we passed multiple tax measures since then. Another really big issue that's happened is, as people have been leaving transit because of service cuts, transit has also gotten a lot slower, which means that it's less reliable and less people want to use it. So we have a lot of these problems that are really kind of happening all at once that are, a lot of people would call this a death spiral, where less people ride, it gets slower, even less people ride, and that repeats over and over and over again. So
yeah, I think one of the challenges that I've noticed, and you've pointed out in previous conversations we've had, is as that death spiral occurs to some of our public transportation, more and more funding goes into the current infrastructure for cars, roads, specifically highways. And what does that really look like for us in the next few years? Well, when we had drastic increases in commute times, drastic increases in traffic over the last decade or so, and then compare that to COVID, where we may have a community that's 30% are going to work from home in a more permanent basis. What do you think is going to change there?
Yeah, so I think, what has kind of happened is, since there are less transit riders because there's been less service, there's been a desire to fund, road and highway expansions. And that's something that we saw in one of the last measures, Measure B, which included, way too much money for these projects, even more money than for transit operations locally. So I think right now we're really at this decision point, especially within the next year or so, we're going to decide what direction we're going to go in, because we have to, our resources are limited, and we have to decide where we're going to spend them. So we can either go with the status quo and continue to build out all of these planned highway projects, or we can invest that money in public transit and really rebuild the system and give people other options.
What do you think the big piece of my campaign for city council is really addressing equity? And there's a huge piece of public transportation having reliable, accessible, efficient public transportation that provides that for some of our community. Can you speak to that as well?
Yeah, I mean, I started taking transit when I was really young, and I legally couldn't buy a car at all, and I've continued to take it ever since. And it's, I save about $8,000 per year, which really makes a huge difference in paying for my education and paying rent and everything like that. So it is a really big equity issue. And when you do eliminate those options, then people don't have the same, people that can't afford cars don't have the same access, or people that are too young to drive cars don't have the same access. And that's really one of the biggest issues that I have.
For me, I also think it's a good reason for us to decide if both things were weighted equally in getting the majority of people to where they need to go efficiently and on time. And then why wouldn't we take the assumption that let's provide that for everyone and get a transportation network together that works regardless of whether you can afford a car or not? But to my understanding, that's also not the case, that if you provide good public transportation, it can be better than driving your own personal vehicle. There's no parking, there's a lot of other efficiencies that get added to having public transportation in place. What are some of the projects that you're specifically advocating for that help us get more funding for public transportation? And what are the things that create public transportation as a more efficient and better means of transportation that we don't necessarily have in place right now here in San Jose?
Well, I think there's two main things. There's getting money for actual service, and there's also increasing speed and connections with other transit that already exists. So in terms of funding, something that I've been involved with for a little over a year now is reallocating Measure B funds from the highway and expressway categories to transit operations so that we can fund more service. Because, one of the biggest issues is the current lines don't run frequently enough. There's gaps in the network that make it difficult for people to get where they need to go. There's not enough connections to Caltrain. So that's something that I've focused on a lot, and I think it's something that would really help the community. And then I also really think that we need to seriously talk about increasing transit speed. There's really cost-effective improvements like signal preemption and even bus lanes or BRT that can dramatically improve speed and would really make transit a lot more competitive with driving. And in some cases, it could almost double travel time if you have a full BRT build out on a corridor. So that's something that I also think there needs to be a focus on. But unfortunately, when it comes to these speed issues, most of the time the cities have control over the roads. So it is on a city by city basis.
Is there a direction that MTC is going to try and change that, or is it about advocating to each of these cities and really doing a lot of the heavy lifting from the ground up, which can certainly be hard?
Yeah, I think MTC can take a leadership role, and even VTA as well, in encouraging cities to take action, but it is really up to the individual cities to make those choices. So I've been talking to some of the cities, and in the city of San Jose, they voted for a priority to explore this and come up with a policy, and that will hopefully be approved sometime later this year. But then of course there's getting funding and actually making it happen. But it is in progress in San Jose, and what ends up happening with that is really going to depend on what our city council members and mayor want to do, and also what the residents in San Jose are asking them for.
It's one of the things I'm excited about as environmentalist and someone that rides public transportation, rides my bike all over the place. How do we shift to 22nd century public transportation, meet up with where the rest of the world really is, and get people out of their cars and into a healthier lifestyle often at times. So knowing that the city of San Jose has a lot of power to shape what the regional network is, and then we also have seats on VTA board as well that will actually make the regional decisions for what we do with our buses and our light rail. So it's a piece that I'm excited to work with you in the future on, and so I appreciate you coming on now and explaining a little bit about the situation. It's a big topic for residents in the district right now. How do we continue to repair our neighborhood streets, especially as traffic was blowing out of proportion and people were taking side streets that weren't necessarily designed to have all of this traffic on it. And we went one of two ways. We went towards expanding all the roads, highways included, and instead of shaping public transportation around a multitude of options. And I think there's a big challenge in that. I know you've talked a little bit about the fact that highway expansions at the point that we were pre-COVID weren't going to be effective. Do you speak to that a little bit as well?
Yeah, so even if you're just living and existing in San Jose and Santa Clara County and you haven't actually studied any of this, you can tell that the traffic is worse than it was 10 years ago or 5 years ago or 20 years ago. And none of these multi-billion-dollar investments that we've made in, Highway 85 and 87 and all of these different highways and expressways that have been built have had any impact at all. So, this is a concept called induced demand. If anyone wants to do more research on that, you can look that up. But even just from looking at it and existing, it's pretty obvious that what we're doing isn't working. So I am very supportive of maintaining our existing roads and highways. I think that having smooth pavement is good for people that are driving and people that are taking buses and walking and biking and all of that. So I really think that the focus should be on maintenance for the roads and highways and expanding transit options.
Yeah, and do you have more of a long-term scope in what you've studied already about transit savings? I mean, from my perspective, the more lanes you have, the more money it is to maintain. And if they're not effective in reducing traffic and you're not investing in getting people off the road and public transportation, that is, through what the research I've done, the most cost-effective long-term approach for us to get people efficiently from A to B, then we continue to go down this path of almost fiscal irresponsibility when we're not actually looking at the data that projects out what's good for the city, both residents getting from A to B and financially. Is there like a 30-year vision that you and other transit advocates kind of have for the city and for the Bay Area right now?
Yeah, I think I would like to see some of our agencies merged or at the very least collaborate better with each other. People are commuting from San Jose to San Mateo County and San Francisco County, and we need to make sure that those connections line up and that people aren't waiting for 30 minutes after they get to the Caltrain station from the light rail and things like that. So I think that's something that really does need to be improved. Then also fully electrifying all rail and buses. This is going to take quite a while, but there is state and federal funding available for that. And then, I think at some point we probably are going to need to put a measure on the ballot, whether it's a sales tax or something more progressive. And I think when that point comes, we need to really make sure that we're funding operations at a much higher level, because the amount of service that you have and how frequently everything is running is really something that drives ridership.
Yeah.
People don't want to take buses or trains that only come every hour. When you increase the frequency, that gives people a lot more freedom and it makes it a lot more attractive. So I think that's something that has really not been talked about very much and that people kind of ignore, but operations is really a huge part of what needs to happen.
Yeah, I mean, my one example is I'm about 8 minutes from San Jose International Airport by car. It's an hour and 30 if I jump on light rail and transfer to a bus, and it really shows you that this is a huge problem in how we move forward, and something that needs leadership like yours to be able to fix and to be able to advocate and move forward on. So again, I appreciate you coming on and for taking the time. Excited to talk about this more, especially with residents as we discuss, what do they want to see in their community? What do they want to see in the city? So thank you.
Yeah, of course.
All right. Well, I appreciate it and hope you enjoy your Tuesday, Monica. Thank you for your time.
You do.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.